Good morning everyone. Good morning mom. My name is Dario L. Urquiza III from BSID 2A English and the Group 7. For today's video, we are going to present and discuss to you about the gender and sexuality. And for my assigned topic is all about feminism. So what is feminism? Feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. There are at least 4 different feminism. These are the radical, Marxist, liberal, and what Sylvia Walby calls the dual system body. First, I will going to talk about the radical feminism. Radical feminists argue that women's oppression is the result of a system of patriarchy. It is a system of patriarchy. It is a system of domination in which men as a group have the power over women as a group. In other words, radical feminism opposes existing political and social organization in general because it is inherently tied to patriarchy. Second is the Marxist feminism. Marxist feminism is a philosophical variant of feminism that incorporates and extends Marxist theory. Marxist feminism analyzes the ways in which women are exploited through capitalism and individual ownership of a private property. Feminism, like Marxism discussed in Lesson 4, is always more than a body of academic text and practices. The third one is the liberal feminism. Liberal feminism differs from both Marxist and radical feminism in that it does not possess a system of patriarchy or capitalism. It determines the oppression of women. It is also called the mainstream feminism. It is a main branch of feminism defined by its focus on achieving gender equality through political and legal reform within the framework of liberal democracy. Lastly is the dual system theory by Sylvia Walby. It is a synthesis of Marxist and radical feminist theory. When we say synthesis, it is a combination of Marxist and radical feminist theory, rather than being an exclusive focus on either capitalism or patriarchy. These perspectives argues that both systems are present and important in the structuring of contemporary gender and relations. So, I hope you understand about my topic. And let's proceed to the next topic.
Good day everyone, this is Aina Malangsa from BSID English 2A, and for the assigned topic to me is all about the woman at the cinema. So let's proceed. Mulvey's analysis is impressive and telling throughout, and despite the fact that it is made in an essay of fewer than 13 pages. Its influence has been enormous. However, having acknowledged the essay's power and influence, it should also be noted that Mulvey's solution is somewhat less telling than her analysis on the problem. They advocate a cultural politics of intervention. We cannot afford to dismiss the popular by always positioning ourselves outside. It is from popular culture that most people in our society get their entertainment from the cinema. So as an alternative to popular cinema, she calls for an avant-garde cinema which is radical in both a political and an aesthetic sense of challenges the basic assumptions of the mainstream film. So no other theorist has advanced feminist considerations of women in the film more than the British filmmaker and academic Laura Mulvey. So the research Laura Mulvey's research is all about, she is focusing on the woman at the cinema. So it is all about the visual pleasure and narrative cinema, originally published in Screen in 1975. It has been a foundational text on the male gaze in traditional narrative films and women as the object of that gaze. So talking about feminists or the females, it includes Lorraine Gaiman and Margaret Marshman in 1988, have begun to doubt the universal validity of Mulvey's argument, questioning whether the gaze is always male or whether it is merely dominant among a range of different ways of seeing, including the female gaze. So let's proceed. So there is another one, female who advocates feminist cultural studies which relates commonly derided popular forms to the condition of their consumption in the lives of socio-historical constituted audiences. This is Christine Gledhill, 2009. She has also says that or advocates the different feminist cultural studies that relates on the popular forms, which conditions and the consumption of the lives, which connects or relates to the socio-historical constituted audiences. So, J.K. Stacy's in 1994, Stargazing Hollywood in Female Spectatorship presents a clear rejection of the universalism and textual determinism of much psychoanalytic work on female audiences. So, her own analysis begins with the audience in the cinema rather than the audience constructed by the text. So, it tells here that it focuses on the audience, not on the text. So, her approach takes her from the traditions of film studies, as informed or connect by Mulvey's analysis or the position, to the theoretical concerns of cultural studies. So in table 7.1, film as subject of study in film studies and cultural studies. So under the film studies, we have the spectatorship positioning, textual analysis, meaning as production-led, passive viewer, unconscious, and pessimistic. So under the cultural studies, we have the audience readings, ethnographic methods, meaning as consumption-led, active viewer, conscious, and optimistic. So this too is the result or the observation of Stacy, of what she conducted to make an evidence or explanation about the two different studies. So now let's proceed to the reading romance. Okay, so in Loving with the Vigians, Tania Modleski in 1982 claims that women writing about feminine narratives tend to adopt one of three possible positions. So these are the dismissiveness, hostility, or tending unfortunately to be aimed at the consumers of the narratives, or most frequently a flippant kind of mockery. So against this, she declares it is time to begin a feminist reading of women's reading. So it tells about also on women. She argues that what she calls mass-produced fantasies for women, including the romance novel. So example, we as the females, we can relate on this because some of us nowadays are reading on the novels or the love stories, right? So speak to very real problems and tensions in women's lives. In spite of this, she acknowledges that the way in which these narratives resolve problems and tensions will rarely please modern feminists. Far from it. Modleski does not condemn the novels or the women who read them. Rather, she condemns the conditions which have made them necessary, concluding that the contradictions in women's lives are more responsible for the existence of harlequins than harlequins are harlequins are for the contradictions. So she drifts towards, then rose back from the full force of Marx's position on religion, which would leave her, despite her protest to the contrary, having come very close to the mass culture position of popular culture as opiate. Rosalinda Coward's 1984, which is the female desire is about women's pleasure in popular culture. The book explores fashion, romance, pop music, horoscopes, soap operas, food, cooking, women's magazines, and other texts and practices which involve women in an endless cycle of pleasure and guilt. So she states there that the guilt, this is our specialty. So Coward does not approach the material as an outsider, so a stranger to pleasure and guilt. The pleasures I describe are often critic, but as someone examining myself. So Coward, she is talking about herself, or based on her experience of what she feels, or because it tells there that examining my own life under a microscope. So her position is in marked contrast to that, say, of the culture and civilization tradition, or the perspective of the Frankfurt School. So popular culture is not looked down on from an Olympian height as the disappointing, but rather predictable. So it is interesting. So culture of other people. This is a discourse about our culture. So furthermore, she refuses to see the practices and representations of popular culture. The discourse of female desire as the first. Coward's interest in romantic fiction is in part inspired by an intriguing fact that over the past decade in the 1970s, the rise of feminism has been paralleled almost exactly by a mushroom growth in the popularity of romantic fiction. She believes two things about romantic novels. First, that they must still satisfy some very definite needs, and second, that they offer evidence of and contribute to a very powerful and common fantasy. She claims that the fantasies played out in romantic fiction are pre-adolescent, very nearly preconscious. She believes them to be regressive in two key respects. So, romantic fiction is surely popular because it restores the childhood world of sexual relations and suppresses criticisms of the inadequacy of men, the suffocation of the family, or the damage inflicted by patriarchal power. Yet, it simultaneously manages to avoid the guilt and fear which might come from the childhood world. Sexuality is defined firmly as the father's responsibility, and fear of suffocation is overcome because women achieve a sort of power in romantic fiction. Romantic fiction promises a secure world, promises that there will be safety with dependence, that there will be power with subordination.
Good day, everyone. Before I start my discussion, I just want to introduce first myself. I am Arajean A. Mahinay, taking up Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English. Today, our topic is all about gender and sexuality. It means that gender refers to a socially constructed rules, behaviors, expressions, and other identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender-diverse people, while sexuality is all about our sexual feelings or your sexual feelings, thoughts, attractions, and behaviors towards other people. Watching Dallas and reading women's magazines are the topic assigned for me. And also, this is the continuation of Miss Malangsa's report. And now, let's proceed to my first assigned topic, which is Watching Dallas. Jan Ang's Watching Dallas was originally published in the Netherlands in 1982. The version under discussion here is the revised edition translated into English in 1985. This formed the empirical basis of her study of the pleasures of watching Dallas for its predominantly female audience. Yin Ang's study of watching Dallas, the American primetime soap opera, is a classic example of the new audience research, or Ang's 1985. Ang invited readers of the Dutch women's magazine Viva to write to her about their Dallas viewing experiences. Some readers say that they like to watch the TV serial Dallas, but often get odd reactions in it. The context for Ang's study is the emergence of the American primetime soap, Dallas, as an international success. In early 1980s, 90 countries watched this primetime soap opera, which is Dallas. And also in Netherlands, Dallas was regularly watched by 52% of the population. Instead of question what are the effects of pleasure, Angst answered that she possessed the question what is the mechanism of pleasure, or how is it produced, and how does it work. Angst writes as an intellectual and a feminist, but also as someone who has always particularly liked watching soap operas like Dallas. Again, we are a long way from the view from above, which has often characterized the relations between cultural theory and popular culture. So next is reading women's magazines. In the preface to Inside Women's Magazines, Janice Winship, 1987, explains how she has been doing on her research about women's magazines since 1969. She also tells us that it was also around the same time that she began to regard herself as a feminist. Integrating the two, she admits that she has sometimes proved difficult. Often it was hinted that she should research something more important politically. This often leads to women being caught up in defining their own femininity inextricably through consumption. Many of the guesses of femininity in women's magazines contribute to the secondary status from which we still desire to free ourselves. At the same time, it is the dress of femininity which is both source of the pleasure of being a woman and not a man, and in part the raw material for a feminist vision of the future. Part of the aim of Inside Women's Magazines is to explain the appeal of the magazine formula and to critically consider its limitations and potential for change. Regardless of politics, women's magazines continue to operate as survival manuals, providing the readers with practical advice on how to survive in a patriarchal culture. Women's magazines appeal to the readers by means of a combination of entertainment and useful advices. This appeal, according to Winship, is organized around a range of fictions. These can be the visual fictions of advertisements or items on fashions, cookery, or family and home. Each in its different way attempts to draw the reader into the world of magazine and ultimately into a world of consumption. But pleasure is not totally dependent on purchase. Janice Winship recalls how in the hot July in which she wrote Inside Women's Magazines without any intention of buying the product, she gained enormous visual pleasure from a magazine advertisement showing a woman diving in an ocean surrealistically continuous with the top end of a bath. As she explains that she said, "We recognize and relish the vocabulary of dreams in which adds deal. We became involved in the fictions they create, but we know full well that those commodities will not elicit the promised fictions. It doesn't matter without bothering to buy the product. We can vicariously indulge in the good life through the image alone. This is the compensation for the experience you do not and cannot have." But now, in our generation, few women are reading magazines because of new habits and also because of our new technologies that will affect our lives, and more we give more time in watching movies, watching videos, and also some women felt not interested about the contents and informations and also the advices that are the contents of women's magazines. So, I hope you learn about my topic. That's all for my report. And let's proceed to our next reporter.
Good day everyone, I am Rosalinda and I will be your next reporter for today. So from the recent reports, we had learned that feminism has brought into many things, but one thing or one of that some feminists have already disowned is about the men's studies and masculinities. So this time we are going to tackle all about men's studies and masculinities. Okay, so to discuss the supposed naturalness of gender and the ideological fiction supporting compulsory heterosexuality, so we will begin with one of the founding texts of queer theory, and we will come up with Judith Butler. So in his writing, What a Man's Gotta Do, Sir Anthony tries to speak about masculinity, about what it is and how does it works. So in this study, he focused on what he called dominant masculinity. So what is dominant masculinity? Dominant masculinity is a myth of heterosexual masculinity as something essential and self-evident, which is tough, masterful, self-possessed, knowing, always in control. So he also began with a proposition of what he calls cultural construct. So now we're able to know about what is cultural construct. Okay, so in the study, Sir Anthony argues that dominant masculinity operates as a gender norm, and that is against this norm that many other lived masculinities, such as, let's set example, the gay masculinity, involved to measure themselves. So as part also of these studies or this argument, he analyzed the way dominant masculinity is represented across a range of popular culture texts, now such as including pop songs, popular fictions, films, television, and newspapers. So in these studies, he had come up, therefore, with a conclusion. Okay, so he therefore concluded that clearly men do not live out the masculine myth imposed by stories and images of dominant masculinity, but neither can they live completely outside the myth, since it pervades the culture. Its coercive power is active everywhere, not just in screens, hoardings, paper, but even inside our own heads. So in this conclusion, we are struck by this conclusion of Sir Anthony I. Stops, because even in us, even in human person, even in our heads, we had a culture or a belief that if when we say that masculine men or masculinity, kailangan you are bold, fierce, strong, masculine, you have a body, you are very manly, and that is what he is trying to argue, that not all men live out the masculine myth. With regards to these studies, feminists encourage men to conduct a comparable research, especially that there are those women who believe of the system of patriarchy, right? That they believe that one of the cause of women oppression is caused by a system of patriarchy, that men are more dominant than women. So they encourage men to truly conduct a comparable research so that they are able to know or understand, to have a wider perspective about the world of men's and masculinities. So that's all for today for my report in men's studies and masculinities. We move on to men's studies and masculinities. This time, we are going to tackle all about queer theory. So, queer theory. So, when we say the word queer, it is something, a word that is new to us. But according to the definition, queer is, or queerness is defined as something strange. So to have a deeper understanding about what is queer theory, let us discover this explanation by Paul Burston and Colin Richardson of 1995. So they state that queer theory is something that provides a discipline for exploring the relationships between lesbian, gay men, and the culture which surrounds, and for the large part, continues to seek to exclude us. So that is the explanation of Paul Burston and Colin Richardson. Okay, so queer theory seeks to locate queerness. So in this topic, it does not focus on the question of what it means to be a lesbian or gay within a culture, or to various performances of heterosexuality created by the culture. But we are going to focus on the purpose of queer theory. So the project of queer theory is to attack the very naturalness of the gender. Natural, the state of being natural. So, di ba, when we talk about the gender, it has two components. The internal gender and how we expressed ourselves to the world. So, that is what is the main point of that queer theory. Okay, so Butler begins from Simon de Beauvoir's observation that one is not born a woman, but rather becomes one. So Simon de Beauvoir distinguished two distinct difference of gender as culture and sex as nature. So Simon de Beauvoir suggests that while biological sex is stable, there will always be different and competing versions of femininity and masculinity. That is why in this study, or in her point of view, she had proposed rather, the binary gender system. So we have now here the binary gender system. We have the sex, we have female and male. So she stated there that there are competing versions of femininity, right? Because femininity there are different live feminities. And when we say also for masculinities, there are any other live masculinities. So that is the binary gender system proposed by Simon de Beauvoir. So in this proposition, Judith Butler Okay, so in the binary gender system, Judith Butler argues that it only works in the assumption that there are only two biological sexes, which is the male and female. So that is what Judith Butler argued about. So in this position, she argues that even in biology itself, it's always already culturally gendered as male and female. So she argued that even in biology, so if ever if a person is born, if you have a dick, then you will be a man. If you have a vagina, then you will be a woman. So that's it. The biology itself, it is a culturally gendered male and female. There is a competing version of male and female. So even in biology. So in other words, there is no truth at the head of the gender because sex and gender are already culturally categorized. Okay, so that would be all for our report in gender and sexuality. Thank you so much for watching, and once again, good day.